So let's have a look at progressivism versus conservatism. The moment with COVID and the politically charged landscape of our world, I think it's a pertinent time to dive deep into the political dichotomy that's formed between left and right on a global scale and seems to really be tearing people apart, perhaps in a more extreme way than ever before, in a more visible way than ever before. To me, this is unsurprising. And I say this because conservatism, progressivism, these are aspects of our own minds. These are mechanisms of our own experience, of our own suffering, in fact, and our own ill management of suffering. What do I mean by this? The mind doesn't like to stay in the present moment. The conservative mind, the conservative element of mind, will try and exit the present by grasping onto the past. The past was always better for the conservative. Yesterday was better than today, and the day before yesterday was better than yesterday. Whether this is true or not true doesn't matter. To the conservative, the present is always terrible, the past is always better, and the future will always be worse than the present. The progressive element of mind is in some ways the opposite. Also doesn't want to be in the present, and so always reaching forward, always grasping. Tomorrow must be better, tomorrow will be better, tomorrow needs this, tomorrow needs that. Scientific progress, political progress, human progress, these are all grasping, born of a dissatisfaction and an inability to sit in what currently is, an inability to merely be with truth. What is truth? And truth is whatever you're experiencing right now. It's not a thought, a memory that's distracting your attention to some illusion that no longer exists. It's not either a grasp, looking to the future, trying to imagine what will tomorrow look like. So both these mechanisms of mind is found in all of us, without exception. It's there. With the advent of modern technology and social media and the amount of time as humans we seem to be investing in these platforms and the amount of content we are subjecting ourselves to, the amount of impressions we are taking, and due to the selective feedback that these platforms give us, the mirror chambers that they create, where if you're a conservative person in the sense that you favor the conservative mechanism of mind to bring you out of present into past, then your Facebook feed, your YouTube feed, your social medias will be filled with articles reconfirming today is bad, tomorrow will be worse, yesterday was better. And so that mechanism is being fed and being fed and being fed, and it grows stronger and stronger and stronger. Likewise, a progressive on their social media platforms, their Facebook, their YouTube, another echo chamber, constantly filled with articles about the next new thing that will remove suffering, that will make tomorrow better than today, and constantly filled with articles reminding how bad yesterday was, how bad today is but better than yesterday, and how tomorrow will be better than today. both of these mechanisms stem from a reaction away from being present, being still in whatever the current experience is. Because the truth of the matter is that until we develop the capability to truly be still with the present, being in the present is a tremendous suffering. It always has been this way. It will always be this way, so long as our minds are reacting in this way. So long as our minds aren't trained, haven't developed the capacity to be with suffering calmly, clearly, not to react to suffering by grasping for some elusive object, some elixir that'll take away the suffering, that'll make everything fine, some paradise of tomorrow that whatever new invention may provide. And no grasping for the past of what you imagine yesterday was like. False imagination. Yesterday was not paradise. Yesterday was also suffering. So this grasping and aversion arise simultaneously in both progressive and conservative mechanisms of mind. It's a grasping for something elusive, something that doesn't actually have any tangibility, any existence, and it's an aversion to what currently is. Because what actually is, what is real right now, you don't know. Examine them. Look inward, see what of you is you. Is it your body? Is it your mind? Is it your thoughts? Do you have essential tangibility? Who are you? Right, this is really fucking important. Who are you? Because I've spent a long time looking for myself, and I've yet to find anything tangible. And if there's no tangibility, then I am simply the content of my experience. And in fact, in the colloquial way, we talk about I as identity, whoever you are in the world, with your family and your community and your things and your objects. These are all projections of this mechanism of dissatisfaction, of this mechanism of separateness. We hold ourselves separate, and the mind provides all sorts of reasons why. What do I mean by holding oneself separate? Or perhaps a more clear example is, what does it look like when one does not hold themselves separate? And the vast majority of people will touch this at least once in their life. And even those who may not have touched it yet may have an intuitive sense. It's there, just hasn't arisen to the surface yet. What is this quality of oneness? It's love. It's flow. We've all had the experience of falling completely head over heels in love, At least a lot of us have. And most times the love consumed us so much, we forget ourselves. All thoughts of your survival, of your well-being are put aside. Nothing matters but the object of your awareness, and that is usually the person, in this case. So how can we love life, as cliched as it may sound? How can we be one with our experience? Well, we need to look at why aren't we? Or why does it seem that we are not? And the mind will provide 1,000 reasons not to love, not to be gentle, not to be vulnerable. It'll say, no, I cannot be weak. Last time I opened my heart, it hurt so much. It was so very painful. I can never do it again. I must hold myself tightly and make sure that I survive. And what is the I that survives? It is nothing else than this mechanism ensuring, perpetuating its own survival. There is no essential base to the I. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what happens when we do surrender for a moment? When we do open our hearts for a moment? When we do love for a moment? Oh, tremendous suffering. In the sense that when our heart is full, it is heavy. When our heart is heavy, it is the emotion we call sadness. The lover carries a deep water of sadness, a deep ocean of sadness. Because even in loving, to love truly, to love purely, he is letting go. Even in loving, he is surrendering his love. But we get tremendously confused. What we think to be love, what we call love, is most times infatuation. And this is the same energy arising, but misdirected, not pure. This is an energy that the ego tries to direct, and it says something, this tremendous power within me, this tremendous energy has been released. And it appears that it is this person who has released it. They must be mine. I will make them mine. I must hold on to them. They are so beautiful. When I am with them, I feel so good. I feel so powerful. I feel so energized. I feel so free. I. So much focus is placed on the I, so little on the one who is actually loved, or on the love itself. Because even then, we shower the beloved with gifts. We shower the beloved with adoration, attention, awareness. But it is actually ourselves who we are showering with gifts, because we want to hold on to these people, because the this person because they make us look good at its heart. And once one breaks the layers of illusion, that is at the most surface level. This illusion is that you love the other person, not that you actually are only loving yourself. Once you realize the selfishness of the infatuation, once you realize the selfishness of nearly everything you do, tremendous suffering. Because what kind of person only cares about themselves? What kind of person only tries to pleasure other people in order to pleasure themselves? What kind of person only loves others to love themselves? A sick person. A very, very sick person. But in order to become healthy, we cannot run away from our sickness. But we must learn to face it right. When we come into contact with this sickness, with this feeling of self-loathing or sheer pain, the essence of suffering, of fear, of grasping, of hating oneself, and so hating everything else. Once one feels the dark, thick sludge of shadow, immediately it is too intense. One wants to recoil. And so the mind generates a pattern of aversion. And this is fulfilling the prophecy, self-fulfilling prophecy of suffering. Because by moving away from the suffering, or tricking ourselves into thinking we're moving away from the suffering, in fact, we are reinforcing the cause, and the root cause is the selfishness, self-centeredness. If one experiences a heartbreak, immediately the advice to family and friends: move on. What does it mean to move on? It means forget that, put that behind you. Look to the future. This is the progressive mechanism of mind, and it is the mechanism of aversion, saying this heartbreak, this love that I now cannot assign to someone else, that I must own as mine. It is too scary. It is too powerful. I must find someone else to hold it for me tomorrow, the next day. Or one may become very morose, very depressed. And indeed, some people, psychologists, may even advise this. Sink into the sadness. But by doing this, by identifying so strongly, oh, I am so heartbroken. Oh, I will never be good again. It was only good yesterday when I had the other person to hold my love. By doing this again, it's the same mechanism of mind. It's the conservative mechanism of mind, but it's an aversion. It's an aversion from the present. It's a grasping for the past. So what to do then? neither of these mechanisms serves us in any way. By looking to the future, these progressives, or progressive aspect of our mind, causes more suffering. Because should we find something to say, here I can put my love, someone to hold our love, again one is going into ignorance, into delusion, and whoever will hold your love at some point will drop it, at some point will give it back to you, return it, to say, I don't want this anymore. What starts must end, what's born must die. This is essential truth. And so suffering is really unavoidable in this sense. And so the progressive mind is racing towards its own death, is racing towards its own suffering, perpetuating itself. And so as the progressive goes through day after day, they become more and more frenetic, more and more grasping. This is it, this is it, this is it. Better, better, faster, newer, greater. And in doing so, they cause more and more suffering. And we can see this in the macrocosm of our human collective, of our human society, of our world, in the political and social spheres. Progressive governments, whether you believe yourself to be a progressive or a conservative, doesn't matter. Many progressive governments have caused much suffering because it is a reflection, it is an embodiment of this mechanism of mind in its extreme form, without any moderating factors that is found in the progressive politician. And so never being in the present, never facing, never loving the people now, never caring for the people now, never nurturing the people now. The progressive politician always points to the future, always says, vote for me, then you will get. Tomorrow you will get. Tomorrow I will nurture you. Tomorrow I will love you. I can't love you now because of him, because of her, because of this, because of that. Only once I have this, only once I have that, will I be able to love you. Will things finally be all right, the way they're supposed to be? Will finally be out of the suffering. Yet it never happens. And so people in the beginning may be sweetened by these honeyed words, and they fall into this illusion, and some sell it better than others. They use science, intellectual ideas, poetry, words, whatever they may, to sell their illusion, to sell their delusion. So it must be your delusion as well. To sell their suffering, it must be your suffering as well. This is not unique to this mechanism of mind. The inverse, the conservative mechanism of mind, is also embodied in the global stage, is also embodied in the human organism. And in this embodiment we see a very similar thing. The conservative says, yesterday things were good. So good. Remember this. Remember that. Yesterday we could do this. Yesterday we had that. Yesterday we were free. Today we are not. Yesterday we had this. Today we are not. They do not talk about all of the negative sides of yesterday. No. And they will take whatever science and whatever intellectual, whatever words they can to sell this illusion, this suffering to the people. And so people will be drawn in by their honeyed words and follow until such a time as they realize more suffering has only been created. The biggest distraction today is in this conflict between progressive and conservative mind, or mechanism of mind. It's a conflict embodied on the global political scale more clearly than ever. But it's also a conflict held in each and every one of us, because each and every one of us holds both of these mechanisms, and they are constantly in conflict. Constantly. One feels the intensity of the energies of love, of being. It is too much. Conservative mind, conservative mechanism of mind tries to pull backwards. Progressive mechanism of mind tries to pull forwards. And so one is stuck in the middle, pulled in two directions. A little bit this way, then a bit back that way. And so this is reflected in the yearly political cycles. This can be seen in global politics. One term there'll be a conservative, next it'll be progressive, then a conservative, then a progressive, and so it goes. And through human history this has been the case. We will fight off the conservative, say, no, you are bad, I know you are bad, I followed you before. I'm following the progressive. The future must hold the answer if the past does not. And so follow the progressive with great abandon, great energy, great belief. But sooner or later, one realizes I'm still in the same issues, I'm still in the same suffering. In fact, it may even appear that it is even worse now. And so then one will go, oh, it was better before, we must go back. And so then the conservative cycle starts. And out of this back and forth, this to and fro, tremendous destruction has been wrought on ourselves and on our planet, and tremendous license has been given to the mechanism of ego, the collective mechanism of ego. Progressive and conservative mechanisms, they are part of the same whole, the same I that says the present is too intense to stay in. It is overwhelming, and it is filled with suffering. Because if one is truly in the present, then one truly grasps just how fucked up we are the rest of the time. If one is truly in the present, one will see the mad rat race, the mad cycle from progressive to conservative and round, and one will see the mad egocentrism, the mad clinging onto I, the mad self-fulfilling prophecy, all of these cycles and many more cycles of suffering. And so experiencing that suffering, mind will jump out. Future progressive, past, conservative. So what can we do about this? Is this a remediable situation? Well, I think it is. In fact, I know it is. Because, while neither work, neither forward nor backwards, simply by remaining in the middle, we may come to truth. What is it to remain in the middle? It means learning to suffer well. What does this mean? Suffering well. Well, when one suffers and one jumps to the past or one jumps to the future, one is not suffering well. One is not remaining with the suffering. One is not being with it. And indeed, when one suffers and one confronts the suffering and slays the demon, suppression. The Hydra has an immortal head. In the myth, Hercules cuts off a head of the Hydra and 2 more grow back. And so he gets his cousin, his follower, to use a torch every time he cuts off a head to sear the wound closed before a head can grow back. But in the end, the last head, the immortal head, was left, and it was immortal. Hercules could not cut it off. And so he, with his tremendous strength, lifted up the largest boulder he could find, practically a mountain, and used it to bury the Hydra's head, the immortal head of the Hydra, to keep it trapped down. And indeed, this is what we do when we confront our demons, when we fight our demons. We fight ourselves, actually, and we suppress ourselves. So what to do instead then? If we're not fighting the demon, should we surrender to him instead? Well, many try this as well. And indeed, these people, like the Hercules of these worlds, who suppress so vehemently and decisively and clearly, and they are right and the world is wrong. These people, in their clarity, they have a certain charisma, a certain allure. Many men will follow the Hercules of the world into battle and will come to death. This has always been the case. And so too, the opposite, the man who bows down before the Hydra, who bows down before the demon and swears allegiance to it, worships it, and in doing so feeds his ego to become powerful, unrestrained. He too has a certain charisma. And we experience this very easily by looking at the mad egos who we spend so much of our time following, watching, wanting to be, through social media and the rest, and even before social media. There's a reason why people follow dictators. There's a reason why people follow evil men, and there's a reason why evil, or what we regard as evil, has charisma. Because we see someone who's completely surrendered to self-satisfaction, who has come to suffering and said, this is all there is. I'm gonna feel good. Fuck anybody else. It's about me. We wish secretly. Our ego sees that and it goes, I want to be that. If only I could be that. It would be so good. And so when we come into contact with someone with a big ego, we feel good in turn. Because just by being close to them, our ego starts to feel empowered. Starts to say, you should worship me like that. You should give me whatever you want. And indeed, there is the temptation. It would feel good. At least one thinks so. But neither of these mechanisms of suppression or extreme expression actually transform the suffering. One suppresses it, the other expresses it, but it is still suffering. And so the evil man is good only to himself. The pious and good man is good and pious only to everybody else, but must be tremendously bad and evil to himself in order to make sure that he is good to others. Because truly, what kind of person is able to be good all the time? It is not natural. It is not natural in the sense that it is not the natural tendency of our mind. And so one is then in constant conflict with oneself. So a middle way, the way proposed by Gautama the Buddha, the way proposed by many traditions, the way proposed that is so often misunderstood. Buddhism is spoken of and, in my mind, often misrepresented by saying, oh, this is a way out of suffering. It is, in some ways, but that attracts a certain kind of person. It attracts someone who is tremendously averse to anything to do with their own suffering. And so they want to feel nice, and they want to feel good, and they'll meditate and chant a mantra and look at the smiling, peaceful Buddha statue and the smiling, peaceful teacher, and they'll feel so nice, so good. And they'll realize, oh, when I'm nice to other people, then I can call myself good. Oh, I feel even nicer now. And so the whole thing becomes a gimmick. It becomes a big wank, a big self-satisfaction. Because the teaching of the Buddha is not only this, it's not immediately exiting suffering, in the sense that in order to exit suffering, you must first suffer. If you haven't even been able to admit, I am suffering, it's the first noble truth, I am suffering, then one will not come out of it. But it is not enough to just know this on the intellectual level. This is not what the Buddha meant when he said, accept the Four Noble Truths. No, you must live the Four Noble Truths. You must live suffering. Only by opening yourself fully, by surrendering yourself fully to the entirety of the experience of your suffering, to the progressive mechanism, the conservative mechanism, the suppression, the expression, whatever is manifesting in the moment and generating tension, generating suffering. Open your heart, be one with this experience, and then suffering turns into love, and the intensity of the pain of suffering turns into the intensity of the joy of compassion. And it is this transformation that is at the heart of all religious traditions, is at the heart of all spiritual traditions, is at the heart of all teachings that hold any resonance on a deeper level. So how does one do that? How does one be with suffering? How does one suffer? We aren't taught this. We are always taught how to leave suffering behind. We are always taught how to avoid suffering, how to make sure we don't suffer again in future, learn from our mistakes. But we are never taught how to experience suffering. We are never taught how to experience most of our emotions. How can one be sad? How can one be happy? How can one be angry? Or rather, how one can be it? How does one experience it in an authentic way? What do I mean by authentic? I mean simply non-reactive. Because the moment there's a reaction, a bouncing out of an experience. The moment this is there, one is not actually experiencing it, one is not being it. So, this is the first teaching. This is the most important teaching in a lot of ways. Because if you don't get this, and you just get, oh, leave suffering, you will suffer forever. This is essential. Learn how to suffer. The simplest way of doing this is observing breath. The technique is very simple. Close your eyes. Make sure you're sitting somewhere quiet, still. Move your awareness to the feeling around your nose, your upper lip, and feel the touch of the breath wherever it first touches on the inhale, wherever it touches on the exhale, in your nose and on the upper lip. And do not try and change the breath. Merely surf it, holding your awareness. And should the awareness wander, it's not so much about bringing it back, but by becoming aware that the mind has wandered, one becomes aware of the breath again. And even as the mind wanders, one is aware of how the breath changes, the temperament, the flow. If you want to breathe properly, pranayama, controlling your breath, breathing deeply, is not the practice. This is the practice. Breathe naturally, but with awareness. Breathe naturally, but with concentration. Awareness and concentration, these are the two wings of this practice. You hold the breath in the surrender of awareness, but the activity of concentration. The yin and the yang. form and the formless. This is the balance of rest that one must find. This is the balance of meditation one must find. And one will notice then, as the mind becomes clearer and clearer, calmer and calmer, less and less reactive, the quality of the breath changes. It becomes more and more blissful. Each inhale is not just an inhale of satisfying your base urge of survival or blind reaction. It is a joyous act of consciousness, a joyous divine celebration of the universal breath of life. But this happens when it happens. No need to go looking for it. 2 points of awareness to add: the top of the breath, the bottom of the breath. At the peak of the exhale, in the moment before the inhale has started, at the peak of the inhale, before the moment before the exhale has started, the top and the bottom of the breath. Nothing special about these points. But in these points of perfect stillness, of the bridge between inhale and exhale, of form and formless, try and surrender. It's an oxymoron, I know. How can one try and surrender? Doesn't make sense. But let yourself fall. Let yourself relax into that moment, whatever that means to you, while maintaining the awareness and concentration on the breath up and down. These 2 moments, surrender. This is meditation technique. This is how we learn how to suffer. Because our breath reflects the nature of our experience. If you're angry, and you're like fucking pissed off, your breath reflects it. If you're sad, your breath reflects it. If you're happy, if you're excited, if you're scared, your breath changes constantly. And more than this, on the very subtle levels, subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler still. The most subtle thoughts, the most subtle impressions, these have an effect on breath. The subtlest aspects of your experience, of your suffering, determines the flow of your breath, determines the quality of your breath. So just by observing, one starts to observe these mad habit patterns of the mind. One starts to observe the progressive mechanism, the conservative mechanism, the suppressive mechanism, the expressive mechanism. And that is all that's required. Initially, this will not be possible. Maybe, but for most people, it seems it's not. The mind, one quickly identifies with the thoughts. In the beginning, it will seem to be a struggle just to stay with breath, just to maintain the awareness. But this is part of it. Because if even the subtlest aspects of our experience inform our quality of breath, then absolutely the addition of our awareness, the addition of calm, clear, concentrated mind, following the breath, uninvolved, will have an effect on the quality too of breath. So this is what they talk about in the tantric traditions as transforming the energies of bondage into energies of liberation through this elixir of calm, open awareness, clear, concentrated mind. Because when this quality is added to all these mad cycles of suffering that we are in, then they start to transform. Speaking of how they transform, what they transform, not enough people has experienced it in truth, particularly in our culture, for us to have a vocabulary to accurately explain it. Poetry, to me, is best suited for the job. And it has its place. It has its place. But for now, it is unimportant. In fact, it has the capacity to be an immense distraction. Because while the mind is reading a description of what this is like, someone else's experience, immediately grasping, I want that. And immediately progressivism. Ooh, in the future I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do the next thing. In the past I had that, I remember that, I did that. And so it reinforces these cycles. Do not misunderstand me. This is not an attempt to break the cycles, merely an attempt to be one with them. And through being one with them, changing one's entire experience. Because if one is with these experiences, with the mind as it reaches, as it grasps, as it propels into the future, into the past, a wisdom arises, a compassion, a humour, an aliveness, where through being open to this experience, what was first held to be suffering, in truth reveals itself to be wisdom. We simply weren't yet open enough to live. And so, by developing this capacity of awareness, we create space for wisdom to blossom. The lotus flower grows out of mud, grows out of shit and decay. And so life comes out of death, and indeed death comes out of life. The yin is found in the yang, and the yang is found in the yin yang symbol. This symbol can be understood as both a symbol of suffering, in the sense that even when one is with form, even when one is with yang, there is the dot of the yin. And in the unclear mind, in the unrefined mind, this dot is the grasping, is the seed being planted even in the peak of form, of, I want formlessness. I want it. I do not like this. I do not like myself. And so, even in life, we reach continually, every moment, closer and closer to death. And so in death, we reach for life. And we can see this quite clearly. The youth are so eager to confront their mortality. They are so eager to grow old. They are so eager to die, to taste death. Death has a tremendous lure to anyone who is young. But the older we get and the closer we get to death, the more it terrifies us, and the more we long for life. We long for youthful clarity and form. But with the addition of awareness that this is the cycle of things, the cycle itself doesn't change, but our experience of it does. So then, rather than in the yang, the dot of the yin, being craving, it is awareness. That craving is not a reaching or a grasping so much, it is an awareness of the inevitable flow of breath. So even as one enters form, one is formless. Even as one enters the formless, one is form. Even as one inhales and reaches the peak of the inhale, the exhale is born. And even as one reaches the peak of the exhale, the inhale is born. And the more we surrender to this cycle rather than fighting it, as the wheel turns, it becomes a symbol of peace rather than suffering. It becomes a wheel of wisdom, of pleasure, rather than ignorance and pain. And this is what we must all, first and foremost, before we even begin to concern ourselves with the outside world of politics, of social development, of the larger human organism, we must first concern ourselves with ourselves. And indeed, people then say, oh, is this not selfish? You're already selfish. It's just a recognition of that fact. You're already selfish, so no use in pretending otherwise, fighting that nature. Use it. Be selfish. Take an hour or two a day and meditate. Surrender to this flow of breath, and you'll find more and more in life. You are surrendering to this flow, and you are experiencing this flow continually. Initially, this will be very hard, and this will be very painful, because initially this flow of yin and yang, this flow of the wheel of existence, is a wheel of suffering. But if one remains with it, after a time, it starts becoming more and more pleasurable, more and more enjoyable. Not just for you, but for everybody you come into contact with. Because this quality of surrender to experience is contagious. You cannot leave the presence of one who is truly vulnerable, truly open, without being changed in some way. This is truth. And so, this is a true pleasure, not a selfish pleasure, which is in fact selfish pleasure, which causes suffering, which causes pain, is no pleasure at all. It is merely an illusion of pleasure, and in fact, in that illusion, it is suffering. And so also, this is the inverse, is the maturation of that. The surrender, this is the way it is, this is the way it flows. The I disappears, and what was passion, the drive of energy to gain one's own pleasure, becomes compassion, the drive and energy for all others to come out of their suffering, becomes love. May all beings, wherever they may be, large or small, far or near, come out of their suffering. Be peaceful, love fully, and be humorous.